Thanks so much for purchasing my DIY hand-painted sign kit. Let's get started. You'll have your sign, your transfer, with a shiny front and a paper back, also a credit card, a glasses cloth, some sponges, and you may receive these little paint pots that have a small amount of paint in them. Truly enough paint, but if you didn't, you can also get any kind of craft paint from Michael's or the dollar store. This is the black one that I use, for example, and then I use a slightly better quality gold one. The magic of our sign is this stencil. We need to remove the paper backing so we can put the stencil on the sign. There's a little corner here that you can hold and then start to remove the paper. Like I see here, you might end up having the stencil stick to the paper. Use your credit card to smooth the paper and push into the stencil, and it will stick to the tape there instead of to the paper. If you have to, you can also start it with your fingernail. As you're pulling, be careful, because notice here the E from the word let kind of got stuck. Every time that happens, you'll see me, I just go back and I push it down with either the card or my fingernail or even just the paper itself to push the vinyl into the tape that's underneath it, and then you can slowly continue to move the paper. Once the paper is all the way off the back of the stencil, lay it gently back down and remove the top little section by tearing it like this. We'll make a hinge that will help us apply it to the sign. Okay, so now it's time to put this on the sign. Just flip it over and line it up carefully and stick down the side where we exposed the back. If you're having trouble, you can remove the backing paper near those arrows. You'll see here that's what I've done on this one. You could remove all of those or just some of them to help you line things up. Once it's lined up to your satisfaction, remove the paper. Again, make sure that nothing sticks to it. It shouldn't, but make sure. And then using your credit card, lay the vinyl down flat against the sign. Now you're ready to smooth that vinyl everywhere all over the sign. You want a really nice tight fit, because if there are any gaps or holes around any of the areas that you see in white right now, then your paint's going to leak through there. So go over it as many times as needed with your credit card until you feel that it's nice and snug. If there are any little bubbles, then make sure you push them out. You can also add the cloth on top of your card if you want and give it an extra wipe where you can add a little bit more pressure without risk of bruising anything with the edge of the card. Okay, so now it's time to remove the front transfer tape. Grab that little section there in the corner where that piece is and start to pull it back. You want to make sure that the blue or whatever color your transfer is stays stuck to the sign, and pull it almost flat back against the vinyl that's already there. Be careful as you do this, same as when you're taking the paper off of the back, that you don't accidentally bring up any of the vinyl that's, say, in the middle of a letter or something like that. If it happens, same as before, just push it down again, rub it with your finger, and keep going, removing the whole thing. I'm just going to speed this up a bunch because this is super boring to watch. Take your time as you do it though. One last thing before you start painting, grab some scissors and cover these little triangles here and the edge triangle if you think it's close to where you're going to paint. I'm just cutting the transfer tape. Shapes doesn't really matter as long as it's just sort of covering the spots where you don't want paint to accidentally get on your sign. And the last step before paint is let's just smooth everything down once more. Take your cloth, put it over your credit card, and smooth all of your vinyl down. You can flex the card quite a lot here, just making sure that you're using the flat side of the card, not any sharp edges. So we start with a coat of white paint on our entire stencil. This is to make sure that nothing leaks through around the edges of our stencil. I take a piece of the paper backing and I use that to get rid of extra paint off my sponge. We're going to use these little makeup sponges as paintbrushes. They work really, really well, and you need very little paint, just the tiniest amount. So you take a little bit of paint, just enough to cover the end of the sponge. Remove it by pouncing it onto the paper. Then go and pounce it onto the vinyl with almost no pressure at all, just enough pressure to leave paint there. Okay, this is already a long video, so I'm going to speed this section up as well, but you can see how many times I go back for more paint off of the page, even though I only dip into the paint twice. Each time I'm only putting a tiny bit of paint on. It's way better to have lots of little light coats than one thick or sloppy coat. One thing you could have done before starting this is protected the edge here where the paint gets really close to the edge of the sign. Just cut a piece of masking tape to size and affix it to the wood so that you won't accidentally get paint on the sign. I gave that some time to dry and I'm back to see if it's still wet. It's not coming up on my finger. Let's take a nice close look and see if there are any areas that I missed with the white paint. I kind of feel like there are, so I'm going to do a second coat of this paint. Another speed up shot, and then I'm going to show you here at the end how I finished with the white paint now pretty much, and there's still actually quite a lot left despite how little there is in this little paint pot. So you really don't need a lot to do this project. It is 2 a.m. and I need to stop here. Normally we would just keep going and we would want to remove this vinyl as quickly as possible. You'll see that I did make my life a little bit harder by leaving this overnight, but I need to sleep. So I'll see you in the morning. We're on to day 2. I've turned on my lights and we're ready to start painting our black and gold. First, a little tip. If you had more than one person painting and you ran out of sponges, just trim off the end of the sponge and you'll have a new flat surface to paint with. Let's take the black paint and repeat yesterday's process. We're going to paint black on the let it and snow words. So take a small amount of paint on the sponge, pounce it off onto the paper, and then pounce it onto the words on the stencil. You'll see that I sometimes pounce off the words first, like here, just so that I can make sure I don't have too much paint on my sponge. And each time you go back over to get more paint on a spot where you put some before, like on the paper or somewhere off the edge of the stencil, you'll pick more paint back up onto the sponge, so it's not going to go to waste. Let's just speed through this first coat of black paint. In real time, this took about 1.5 minutes, especially being careful over here right next to the snowflake. Now we do the exact same process on the snowflake. I'm going to use a fresh sponge with the gold paint and make a nice gold snowflake. You may remember that I said I used a slightly different paint for the gold paint. This one actually took 2 minutes to do in real time because this folk art gold paint is actually a little bit thinner than the black paint that I use. Wait a bit for the paint to dry until it's no longer tacky when you touch it, and then go through and put a second coat of both black and gold. While I'm painting here, I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of how much paint I keep on the sponge. I'm going to give you a little close-up. Yep, too much paint, so I'm going to remove a little bit more before I use this to paint. So I'll finish painting this second coat of gold paint, wait for it to dry, and then come back. Because this is such a thin paint, I'll paint a third coat. In the past, once the coats of paint are completely dry, I've used the same technique to add a little bit of glitter glue on top to add a bit of sparkle. It works really well. Today I thought, hey, I'm shooting a video, why don't I do something brand new? And I decided to add some of this clear, loose glitter on top of the wet gold paint. You'll have to stick around to see how that worked out. I had a bit of time while I waited for that gold paint and glitter to dry, so I went away and had a snack. When I came back, I tested it and found that there was quite a lot of glitter coming up on my finger. So I still had that transfer tape that I had removed from the vinyl. I cut parts of it and used it as a sticky tape to remove some of the excess glitter. I think that worked pretty well. The next job is to remove this vinyl stencil so we can show our DIY hand-painted sign. All you need to do is start picking at it at the corner and pull it off. This would have been a lot easier, and it will be for you if you don't let it sit so long on the sign. So I let this sit for more than 24 hours, and that made it way more complicated. You can use a pin or tweezers or even your fingernails, doesn't matter what, to get things started or to pick at small parts and pull them off. You may end up with some small marks like this one from a pin or from the tweezers. Don't worry too much about it, they're pretty easy to fix. We can either paint over it or clean it up with an eraser later. As I mentioned, this normally would come off in a bit of a bigger piece, but the vinyl was already getting stiff from having stuck to the sign for 24 hours. So this is a little bit of a challenge. But that's not a bad thing for a video, because it gives me lots of opportunity to show you how to fix problems. As much as possible, keep going until all the big pieces of vinyl are removed and all that's left is the small pieces in the intricate parts of the design. Go slow with this process and be patient with yourself. If you try and go too fast, then you will scratch the paint a little bit too much with your tweezers or pin or whatever else you're using to lift the vinyl. So take your time and you'll get there soon. This piece actually took me about 3 to 5 minutes to clear off in real time. Okay, at this point I only have small pieces left. I don't want to eyeball it, so I'm going to go get the piece of paper that came with your sign that gives you a map showing you where to remove pieces of vinyl. I'm back with my map. Anywhere where it's white on the paper, I need it to be white on the sign. In the middle of the bottom of the S, the O, the little swirl, and throughout all the snowflake. To accomplish this, we're just going to take our time with tweezers or a pin and pull out each one of those little pieces. Let's fast forward about 10 minutes while I remove all the little tiny pieces in the sign. Okay, this looks fantastic. Let's take a little bit of a closer look. I especially wanted to see at this point, how did that gold paint with the glitter work? And this video doesn't even do it justice. It actually did a really nice job. You can really see it shimmering in person, so I'm really pleased with that. You might notice here on the curl on the word snow that I did nick the black paint. So let me show you how I fix it. I take my tweezers and I dip just one leg of the tweezers into the black paint. That gives me a really fine edge to be able to paint over on top of that curl where I had the mistake and clean it up. Now I want to focus on these lines that I left in the paint with the metal. So a pencil eraser is a great way to get them out, whether they're made with the safety pin or tweezers or something else. Just use a small pencil eraser and just erase them. If by chance your pencil eraser doesn't work, you can also use some of the white paint and either the tweezers and the safety pin or a Q-tip and just color over the line and you won't even see it. My sign is done and ready to be displayed. You could just set it on a mantle, it will hold itself up, or this little saw hook comes with your kit. Let's measure the back of the sign and notice that it's 17 inches wide. So at approximately 8.5 inches, we'll center the saw hook and then use a Phillips head screwdriver to screw it in. Screw in the first side and leave it a little bit loose, then screw in the second side and then tighten the first side again. When I'm putting in the screws, I give it a little bit of a push first to try and center them in and get them started. While you have the sign flipped over like this, you might want to consider grabbing a Sharpie and adding your name and the date that you did this project. I always love doing that with all of my work. Time to flip it over and get one more look at the front of the sign before we do some glamour shots. Here it is. I'm really super happy with how this turned out. Let's take a close look at that sparkle too. I hope you really enjoy making your DIY hand-painted sign by Notable Bee, and I thank you so much for your business. Make some lasting memories and tag me on social media so I can see the signs that you made.